Have you ever noticed that in many old buildings, hotels, palaces, stations, and 19th century public buildings, the bathrooms and water systems seem to have no visible pipes? There are no pipes running along the exterior walls. There are no apparent connections on the floor. There are no exposed structures like those we see in modern buildings today. Even so, these places had working sinks, bathtubs, fountains, and drainage systems. Compared to modern buildings, the difference is striking. Today, even with the latest renovations, we can almost always identify where the pipes run. In older buildings, this isn't the case. In many instances, everything seems too solid, as if the water simply appears and disappears. Historical photographs show complete bathrooms with toilets, faucets, and water connections, but no visible plumbing to connect them. This raises a direct question: where was the plumbing infrastructure? Some of these buildings had extremely thick walls, far exceeding what was necessary for mere structural support. In several projects, the thickness surpassed 1 meter. More than enough space to conceal the internal plumbing. Another curious detail emerges when we see modern renovations in these buildings. When the walls are opened, old ceramic, lead, or cast iron pipes often appear embedded in the masonry, invisible from the outside for decades. In other words, the mystery doesn't begin with the absence of a system, it begins with the absence of a visible system. And that completely changes the question. It's not a question of whether there was plumbing. It was integrated into the architecture so subtly that today it seems non-existent. The most common mistake is thinking that if we don't see pipes, there was no system. But ancient engineering thought differently than modern engineering. The goal wasn't to showcase the infrastructure, but to completely conceal it within the building. Many of these buildings were planned as technical blocks. Water did not enter through multiple points, but rather through a main axis and was distributed internally, like an inverted tree within the walls. Elevated reservoirs were an essential part of the project. The water tanks were located in towers, attics, or other upper structures. The pressure came not from electric pumps, but from gravity, simple, constant, and silent. From these reservoirs, water flowed through vertical columns embedded in the masonry. These columns supplied several floors simultaneously. A single well could serve dozens of points of use. And here's a detail that almost no one notices. Many older designs grouped bathrooms, kitchens, and service areas in a vertical alignment. This wasn't an aesthetic coincidence, but rather a matter of hydraulic logic. The more aligned they were, the fewer branches, the less risk, and the less maintenance. The materials were different too. Before PVC, vitreous enamel, copper, lead, and cast iron were used. Thicker, more rigid pipes, designed to last for decades, were therefore placed inside the structure, not outside of it. In several documented excavations and renovations, drainage channels appear underground, veritable drainage corridors. Some are large enough for a person to walk through. They weren't improvised, they were planned from the beginning. So the question is no longer, how did it work without pipes? And the question is, why did modern architecture stop concealing infrastructure so effectively? And the answer begins to emerge when we analyze the speed of construction, the cost, and industrial standardization, and this changes everything in the next section. When we move beyond theory and begin to examine the actual historic baths that still exist, preserved, excavated, or restored, the picture changes considerably. What seems like a mystery begins to reveal a method, and a well-thought-out method at that. Roman baths are one of the most impressive examples. They weren't just rooms with hot water. They were complete complexes of thermal and hydraulic engineering. They had drinking water intakes, internal circulation systems, temperature control, and wastewater disposal, all planned in layers. Visitors saw marble, steam, and pools. The entire system was hidden beneath the floor and inside the walls. Beneath the heated rooms was what was called a hypocaust, a hollow space through which hot air circulated. Simultaneously, water channels ran along separate routes to prevent contamination and heat loss. None of this was visible to those using the space. The experience was clean. The engineering was invisible. Centuries later, in Ottoman baths and hammams, the principle persisted: internal pipes, elevated tanks, and gravity-fed distribution. Many of these places can still be visited. During restoration, technicians discover embedded pipes that are not visible in any exterior photographs. In 18th and 19th century Europe, noble houses and luxury hotels began incorporating private bathrooms, and here a curious pattern emerges. Plumbing was concentrated in technical walls. Instead of distributing pipes throughout the entire building, builders created vertical bands through which all the infrastructure ran. These bands were then enclosed with thick masonry. This explains why, when observing an old wall, it appears excessively thick for its structural function. It wasn't always solely load-bearing. Often, it was a hidden infrastructure. Another often overlooked detail is the use of raised floors. In many historic buildings, the floor we see today is not the original. There are layers beneath it. Between these layers ran drains, ventilation ducts, and drainage systems. In modern renovations, when the floor is opened up, narrow drainage galleries are revealed that were never included in the original plans. And there's another point that adds to the sense of mystery. The old visual documentation rarely showed the technical systems. Architectural plans for promotional purposes focused on the facade and layout. Plumbing details were kept in separate technical notebooks. Many have been lost, others were never published. The result: we see the building, but not its nervous system. 19th century hotels and train stations already had pressurized water systems using gravity columns. Tanks at the top supplied water to several floors. The water was dispensed by weight and height difference. No motor, no noise, no visible parts. To those who see it today, it seems like magic. For the engineers of the time, it was simply precise physical logic. When these buildings were modernized in the 20th century, many internal systems were removed or replaced with faster-to-install external networks. Exposed pipes are cheaper to maintain, easier to replace, and less dependent on structural walls. However, visually, this completely changed the technical aesthetic of the buildings. So part of the mystery arises from an unfair comparison. We're looking at buildings designed to hide everything and comparing them to buildings designed to expose and facilitate maintenance. But after all this, one interesting question remains. If they managed to hide the infrastructure so well, why is it almost never built that way nowadays? The answer lies in cost, construction time, industry standardization, and a shift in construction priorities, and that's precisely what kicks off the next section of the investigation. If hiding pipes in thick walls worked so well, why did it fall out of favor? The answer is not a loss of knowledge, it's a change in priorities. Ancient construction was slow, artisanal, and designed to last for decades, sometimes centuries. Each major building was almost a unique project. This allowed for the integration of water, heating, and drainage systems into the structural mass itself. It was beautiful, solid, and invisible, but it was also expensive and time-consuming. With the rapid industrialization of the 20th century, the focus shifted. The goal was no longer maximum durability, but rather speed, scale, and ease of maintenance. Construction quickly became a direct economic advantage. Exposed or semi-exposed pipes solve three modern problems at once. They reduce construction time, lower installation costs, and facilitate repairs. If there's a leak, access is immediate. There's no need to break through a stone wall nearly a meter thick. Another decisive factor was the standardization of materials. Modular systems of pipes, fittings, and valves began to be mass-produced. For proper functioning, these systems require predictable and accessible routing. This favors technical shafts, suspended ceilings, and exposed ductwork. There's also a shift in risk perception. Older buildings embraced long-lasting integrated solutions. Modern construction favors replaceable systems. Today, designs assume that components will be replaced throughout the building's lifespan. And then there's the regulatory problem. Current standards require inspection, line ventilation, access points, and technical assessments. A completely hidden infrastructure makes certification and inspection difficult. What was once an aesthetic advantage can now be a technical problem. When all of that is combined, speed, cost, standardization, and regulations, the result is inevitable. Infrastructure shifts from the existing structural mass to accessible service areas. But this contrast creates a curious historical illusion. When we observe an old building with hidden systems, it seems too advanced for its time. When we observe a modern building with exposed pipes, it seems simpler, even though technically it is more complex. The difference isn't in the capacity, it's in the construction philosophy. But there is still one last point that needs to be carefully separated. What is verifiable technical documentation and what has become an exaggerated interpretation over time? And that is what the investigation concludes in the next segment. When a topic involves ancient constructions, hidden systems, and incomplete records, it's easy for two things to happen simultaneously: real discoveries and exaggerated interpretations. The surviving technical records clearly demonstrate the existence of integrated hydraulic systems, which were in use and planned from the outset of construction. Baths, hammams, 19th century hotels, and public buildings all featured internal plumbing, elevated tanks, and underground drainage. This constitutes documented engineering. Modern excavations, restorations, and renovations confirm this with physical evidence: ceramic, cast iron, and lead pipes found inside the walls and under the floor. Nothing invisible, simply hidden by the construction methods of the time. What creates confusion is that not all the technical documentation was preserved along with the decorative architectural plans. Many plumbing plans were kept in separate files. Some were lost, others were never published. When the image survives without the manual, the mystery begins. There's also the effect of out-of-context comparison. When we see an old photograph with no visible pipes, we tend to compare it to modern buildings full of exposed conduits and manholes. The visual difference creates a sense of vanished technology, when in reality it is simply technology integrated differently. This does not diminish the merit of ancient engineering. On the contrary, it demonstrates that there was meticulous planning, intelligent use of gravity, structural thickness, and vertical distribution of systems. The most solid conclusion is not that there was no system, not even if it were impossible technology. This is because it was invisible engineering by design. And when you start looking at historic buildings through this lens, tall tanks, thick walls, vertical alignment of wet areas, everything starts to make more sense. The mystery doesn't disappear, but it changes shape. It goes from the impossible to the ingenious. If you've made it this far, comment, "I watched it to the end," just so I know that this kind of more detailed research makes sense to you. If this content helped you see these old buildings in a new light, subscribe to the channel because there will be more analyses like this, always separating curiosity from evidence. And simply leave a like. It helps the video reach more people who enjoy this type of content. There's a video here that complements this research very well. Click on it and watch it with me. And with that, today's investigation concludes. The question seemed simple. Where were the pipes? But the answer took us through architecture, engineering, construction methods, and changing mindsets over time. Looking at these old buildings again, it no longer appears as an absence of systems, but rather a well-hidden system. If you've made it this far, comment, "I watched it to the end," just so I know that this kind of more detailed research makes sense to you. If this content helped you see these old buildings in a new light, subscribe to the channel because there will be more analyses like this, always separating curiosity from evidence. And simply leave a like. It helps the video reach more people who enjoy this type of content. There's a video here that complements this research very well. Click on it and watch it with me.